It seems that some decisions have been made about what Mayor-elect Mike Duggan will be able to do once in office. So we've been talking about this the last couple of weeks, just what exact role will Mike Duggan play? And now we're getting a sense of what it's going to look like when he takes office in January.
Yeah, they had an announcement today after we taped, and it looks like that Duggan is going to serve, in effect, as the chief operating officer. He'll have about 2/3 of city operations. I think the most notable things are that he won't have the police department. Police department will continue to report directly to Kevin Orr, but he will have development, and I think that's a big piece of this, because previously we saw more of the development activity going to be moved out of the city and into the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation. Now it's staying with the city and will be run by a key Duggan's top fundraiser during the campaign, Tom Luan Sr. So.
Interesting. So what do you think that we're going to see out of this in terms of what he's going to start to do with development?
Well, I mean, I think the primary issue in a lot of Detroit right now is land and land use, and how you take this sort of momentum of development that we've seen in downtown and midtown and spread that to other areas. If you look at other mayors around the country who have really made change in their cities, it's been on this front. I mean, this front as well as public safety tend to be the two big ticket items that they concentrate on. I mean, if you look at Pittsburgh, for example, they had a mayor who had a map in his office of every parcel in the city, who owned it and whether it was moving in a positive direction or a negative direction. And this was to get control of a blight problem that was, a fraction of what we're facing in Detroit. I think this sets Mike Duggan up to try some of those same approaches, get control of the land, figure out which direction it's headed in, and find ways to change its course.
And blight will stay will be with Duggan, and that's a switch. Earlier on, Orr had wanted to keep his hands on blight because of the amount of money that's going to have to be raised and the bonds that were going to have to be sold to pay for the demolition. But during this course of 6 weeks of negotiations, Duggan convinced him to give him blight. And when he was a prosecutor, he had started this fight on blight, and he feels he can be effective with it. And I think this combination of blight and development will really help him get his hands on what to do with the city and the city's footprint.
And also, it will also be keeping track of a lot of those federal funds that are coming in for demolition.
Sure. And, the other piece of this is the Detroit Future City plan, which gives you this tremendous blueprint, and we've needed for a long time.
Tremendous, long-term and slightly complicated,
yes.
that they either have to start hacking into.
That's right. And this gives Duggan an opportunity to be the policy advocate for that plan. In other words, what are the changes to city government? What are the changes to land use policies and things that align with that plan and make it start to really mean something to people.
All right, so what's the relationship, Nolan? What's the relationship between Kevin Orr and Mike Duggan right now? So he was able to convince him, Mike Duggan was able to convince him to give some things over.
I think they respect each other, and I think Duggan handled this very smartly in terms of going in. They've been meeting every Thursday for the last 6 weeks, going in and working this out privately with Duggan. You haven't heard Duggan out stumping around saying, nobody's talking to me, they're not giving me anything to do. He hasn't been making a public case. He's been lobbying the governor very quietly, and I think they've come to a mutual respect, and I think they're convinced they can work with each other.
Public safety, the fact that he doesn't have control over public safety, do you see that as a negative?
I mean, I think he'll see it as a negative. I mean, this is a guy who wants his hands on the wheel. My understanding is that there were some concerns about the impact of decisions he might make in public safety on the other parts of the restructuring, on the bankruptcy.
Like what would he do?
I mean, in terms of reassigning officers, in terms of negotiating contracts that still need to be dealt with, in terms of the police, the numbers of officers on the streets and things like that. That all affects bigger picture things that I think Kevin Orr was afraid could be impacted negatively by somebody else having control of it.
It basically came down to one thing. When Kevin Orr hired James Gregg, he told him, "You'll work for me as long as I'm here," and he's fulfilling that
that's
promise.
also true.
It makes all the sense in the world to put the police department under the new mayor, but he made that promise, that commitment to James Gregg. I wouldn't be surprised as Duggan and Gregg work more closely together that you might see that shift under Duggan. But I think they really wanted to see how Duggan was going to do first.
Yeah, I think that'll be difficult because James Gregg, as you point out, was hired by Kevin Orr and has been saying pretty loudly, I don't work for the new mayor, I work for the emergency manager.
Yeah.
So what does that mean when the emergency manager leaves?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, any job that you have that you're hired by someone and then that person who hires you leaves, I mean, you end up having to work with that person.
And James Gregg will have to prove himself. If he has made a serious dent in the crime problem, it's going to be hard for anybody to dump him. But there was some real concern. I mean, Duggan has Ike McKinnon, former chief, on his transition team, very close to former Chief Warren Evans, and there was very good deal of concern that he would allow those folks to start meddling in what Craig was doing, and they didn't want any part of that.
Understandable. And just before we leave the topic of public safety, there's been another, I guess, roundup. Have you seen it in the news that they've gone in and done a kind of a huge arrest of a number of people? And do you think that that's starting to make an impact? There's been now 2, I think, or 3.
I think this is the 3rd one. And I think there's a series of these planned. It's not the solution, and you hear people throwing rocks at it because it's not going to solve the long-term crime problem. But the truth is, this is one of the things that you have to be doing. People who have warrants have to fear that the police are going to come pick them up, and that's what this is about: is going to places where you've got lots of people who are wanted, and you pick them up and you take them to jail.
And you got to send a message that you can't get away with crime in Detroit. And right now, the truth is you can't get away with crime in Detroit. And so you've got to get these people, these fugitives, off the street. You've got to enforce warrants. You've got to send a message here that something has changed. And, it stands to reason if you've got someone out there who is wanted on a crime, particularly a violent crime, if that person's not picked up, the chances of them committing more violent crimes are pretty great. So if you're going to get a handle on crime, particularly violent crime, you've got to get the bad guys off the streets.
All right.